everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather, and yes, I'm at a slightly different angle. This is the only way that filming is going to happen today for a variety of wonky reasons. But I still wanted to come on here and tell you all about my April reads. April was such an incredible reading month. I'm really excited to tell you about these. And I finished everything I meant to finish, which is just beyond brilliant these days. So I participated in 2 readathons this month, and the first was People April, for which I read Lucy Worsley's biography of Agatha Christie. I love Lucy Worsley as a historian, and I love Agatha Christie's novels. I discovered that I don't find her as interesting a person as I was hoping I would. The first section was really good through her famous disappearance. That all was fun. After that, it began to drag a little bit for me. This does include spoilers to a bunch of Christie novels, so be aware if that's something that bothers you. Actually, in a lot of Lucy Worsley books, she tends to spoil various novels, so just be forewarned going into that. But I'm really glad I read it, and it was still really interesting. Then I read a couple of books for the TBR Clear Out Readathon by Katie at Books and Things, because I desperately need to get a hold of my TBR. The first book that I read for that was a slight disappointment, but it does still mean that I get it off my TBR finally. And that was Wicked by Gregory Maguire. I started listening to this on audiobook, and I had to DNF it. It was not what I was hoping for at all. It was very slow going. I find that a lot of Gregory Maguire's books are very slow going, and it's hard to see why he's including what he's including, how he's come up with these characters, why he is weaving them into the story the way he is, where any of this is going to lead. It makes for a very unsatisfying experience. Beyond that, I wasn't thrilled with his characterization of Elphaba. And keep in mind, I haven't seen the musical either. But from the songs that I do know from the musical, I have presumed that it takes the point of view kind of that Phantom of the Opera does, the musical, in looking at how society creates a monster out of someone who could have been an ordinary human being. This book did not do that. There were a lot of times where Elphaba did things or was referred to in such a way as to make it seem as though there was something inherently evil about her already. And that just doesn't fit what I expected the point of the book to be. So I had to let it go. Then I also read one of my new acquisitions, which was The Star Child by Oscar Wilde. This is one of the new Penguin cloth-bound classics, the little mini classics, which are just delightful. And this one is a collection of Oscar Wilde's fairy tales, including The Star Child, but there are 5 or 6 others in here as well. Yes, there is The Happy Prince, The Nightingale and the Rose, The Selfish Giant, The Devoted Friend, The Remarkable Rocket, The Young King, The Birthday of the Infanta, The Fisherman and His Soul, and The Star Child. And I have to say, I loved the first couple the best. I loved the moral messages they were trying to convey. I love the very old school fairy tale tone that he adopted, but you could still sense that he was kind of smiling through it at the same time, which is just so quintessentially Oscar Wilde. They did tend to drag. I felt like the longer fairy tales could have been edited better, and they weren't my favorites. But that's the nature of any short story collection. So I'm still really glad to own this. Then I read 3 others, which included The Bodies in the Library by Marty Wingate. I finally started this series after my parents recommended it years ago, and I was just utterly thrilled. It's the story of a young woman who has gotten a job as a curator in a museum that not a lot of people tend to frequent, unfortunately. And her manager is rather prickly, and she's not entirely sure what to do. But then someone turns up murdered in the library, and that's when problems really start to arise. It was really interesting. I loved the very everyday nature of this story. Nothing was wild and out of proportion. It was something that an ordinary person could go through. And I just loved being back in Bath through this book, so I'm really looking forward to the other two. I also read some of the oldest books on my TBR, which included Snowflower and the Secret Fan by Lisa C., which I sped through. I loved this book so much. And this is the story of two young women, and it's written from the perspective of one of them. She's now an old woman, and she's looking back on her childhood in what I think was fairly rural southern China in the 1820s, 1850s, describing the entirety of her life that she can remember and how most of it was bound up in her arranged friendship with Snowflower and everything that they went to as girls and then as women. And what I loved is that it's such an in-depth portrait of ordinary women's lives and traditions at this point in Chinese history. But it doesn't feel academic, it doesn't feel like a slog, it feels perfectly natural. But you also come to care so deeply about these characters, and you empathize with them so much. Even when things that you could not have anticipated happen to them. I really loved it. I always hear from people that Elena Ferrante's series is the quintessential definition of female friendship. I'm not entirely sure about that. It feels kind of catty to me from what I know. I wouldn't say that this is the quintessential definition of female friendship either, but I would say it runs Elena Ferrante's books a close second. Not having read them, by the way, but based on what I understand about them, I think this could run at a close second. Then I also read The Winter Rose by Jennifer Donnelly, which I adored. I flew through this one as well, which was not easy. It is close to 900 pages, but I just adored it. This is the second in a series. I read The Tea Rose back in my first year of university, so over a decade ago now, because it was my roommate's favorite book. We each read each other's favorite books that year. But I never investigated any of the others, and I wasn't sure how closely they linked to each other. This ties in very closely with The Tea Rose, so you do have to read that one before you go on to this one. But Fiona and Jo and a lot of other familiar characters from The Tea Rose are back again. And they are main characters, but we also get two new main characters. Another character from The Tea Rose becomes a main character, and his identity is kind of a secret, so I can't tell you who. But they also weave in a new main character, who is India Selwyn? India Selwyn Jones, who is a very wealthy young woman who has just completed a medical degree at one of the universities that will allow female students. And she's anxious to join a practice not in a wealthy area, but in one of the poorest neighborhoods in London where she can really make a difference. And in so doing, she makes new friends, she falls in love, but she's also confronted with not only the realities of trying to help the criminally impoverished and the systematically impoverished, but also fighting bigotry, gender stereotypes. The villain in this is one of the worst people I have ever read And it makes it worse because he is so real. There are still men who behave like that. It's not mustache twirly at all. It is absolutely believable. And she even gives you insight into why he is driven to do what he does. And even that is believable, and you feel horrible for understanding it, but it makes it so much better. And I highly recommend this series, and I will now get to book 3 a lot sooner than I ever thought I would. By the way, my roommate Ellie has a wonderful bookstagram, so I will put a link to her page down below if you are interested. And then finally, just for fun over spring break, because I had the time to tackle several monstrous books, I read A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. I bought the entire box set of this series over break so that I could read book 3. So this is the 3rd in her Court of Thorns and Roses series, and I spoke about the first 2 in my March wrap-up, because I read them towards the end of March. So this follows on with Feyre's journey in Prythian and Fairyland, and all of the various seasonal courts that are there. Things are unleashed at the end of book 2 that she has to deal with, and I have to say I loved this one. I think possibly A Court of Mist and Fury is my favorite, but this runs it a close second. We got to spend so much time with so many characters, and they were really given a chance to shine and really develop, which was exactly what I wanted from that series. And you get more of it in book 2. We got even more of it here. So I'm really excited to see where this series goes. I have book 3.5 on my May TBR, as you will have seen. So I'm excited to see where this goes. They're smutty. They are not literary in the slightest, but they are fun, and everyone needs some of that too. Then I also read 2 other books, which I don't have physical copies of right now. Firstly, I've been reading one D.E. Stevenson book every month, and this month I read Celia's House. I have a physical copy, but my mother is borrowing it at the moment. This is a loose retelling of Mansfield Park in a way, but it also allows several generations of this family to inherit this house, and it explores all of their lives. And it's the story of an older woman named Celia who decides to leave her estate in Scotland to one of her nephews who has a young family. And she demands that one of his daughters be named Celia so that she will leave the house to her. And she will inherit when she turns 21, and that way it will always be Celia's house. And after her death, we then follow the family, this nephew, his siblings, his wife and children, and how this inheritance affects the rest of their lives. It is a tad bit darker than some of her other books, and I think that's the Mansfield Park influence. But I will also say that it's a lot lighter in tone than Mansfield Park was, especially the ending. So, an interesting read. Not my favorite of hers by any means, but I'm still really glad to have read it. And then I also read Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, because everyone seems to be reading it, and it came in as a hold from the library for me. It was fantastic. If you haven't heard, this is a novella about a man who was the son of a single mother in Ireland in the 1960s. And he is now grown up, he is married, he has a family of his own, including several daughters, and he's a coal delivery man. And in his deliveries, he delivers to a Magdalen laundry and discovers exactly what's being done to those young girls in the laundries. And over Christmas, really struggles with a lot of identity issues because of that. And it is a novella, so I can't tell you any more than that. But it deserves all the praise it was given. Her writing is amazing. I particularly loved how much she captured the tone and, I don't want to say the dialect, but the very unique way that that area of Ireland has of speaking. I could hear it perfectly. It was so short, it was so simple, and yet it packed an incredible punch without any grand gestures and without any flourishes. It's going to stay with me for a very long time. Given how internal it was, I'm curious to see how they're going to make it into a film, but I will definitely see it when it does come out. So those were all of the books that I finished in April. Let me know down below what you thought of any of these books if you have read them, or if you read any standout reads that you think I should read as well. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.